All right. Welcome, everybody. I'm super excited to have Maura Church and everyone else here for a locally optimistic conversation around career ladders for technical folks, non-technical folks, and what data career growth looks like. So if you're in a place where you can become camera on, that's great. We love to see everybody's face and it makes it feel a little more communicative. But if you're not, totally understand. And this, I think, is going to be very interactive. So don't hesitate to speak up, ask questions, add your point of view, all of that. And we will be chatting in Slack, not in the Zoom chat here. So that channel is Meetup Growth Leveling. I will drop the name of that Slack channel in the Zoom chat, but that's it. Otherwise, if you've got questions, feel free to drop them in there. Side chatter, everything, welcome. And so with that, I will hand it over to Maura. Welcome and thank you.
Awesome. Thanks, Caitlin. Really excited for this convo. I have a few slides for us to look at as we chat, but I'll give some preface to sort of what we're doing and why we're here. There was a discussion in the leading data team Slack channel in Locally Optimistic a few months ago at this point around getting folks who lead teams together to talk about things that are specific to leading teams or managing, or maybe you're starting to think about managing and leading teams. And one of the ideas that came up was leveling and how you think about leveling for your team, setting expectations, specifically which of those expectations are related to technical skills like SQL or Python or machine learning, which are related to non-technical skills like collaborating or communicating with stakeholders. And so that's the focus of our conversation today, is to talk about all of those things. So this has been very top of mind for me. I lead a data science and engineering team of about 20 folks, and we just released brand new leveling guides for both of those teams, data science and data engineering. And so I've been in the thick of this problem and sort of wrestling with some of the questions that come up. So I'm excited to share some of the things that I've thought about and sort of where we've netted out at Patreon. But I'm also really excited to hear from others around what's been easy, what's been hard with leveling and expectations, maybe some questions that are still on your mind, and we can learn from each other. So to get us started, I thought I'd just start with a question that we can maybe put some answers to in the Slack channel, which is sort of what are the best practices that your team uses today for leveling? Maybe what have you seen or heard from other teams? And what are the ways in which you'd like to improve your current leveling guide, expectations by level, sort of whatever you want to call it? And I'll start by sharing today what I've seen and what we're doing at Patreon. So one of the best practices we try to use is, first of all, to make levels very transparent and open. So everyone can access the leveling guide. You can read the expectations. They're very clear, as well as making them very specific. So rather than just a senior data scientist is a good collaborator, we try to be very specific in saying this data scientist leads projects collaboratively across engineering and product, and that looks like X, Y, and Z. One of the ways in which one other best practice we do is we tie a lot of our expectations back to our company core values, which are sort of company-wide. What are the norms that we expect by level? And so that is something that I think is sort of best practice that we do as well. So would love to, I'm going to stop sharing this and go to the Slack channel. I'll actually just collapse it so we can still see it, but give me a second here. And would love to hear some best practices. You can also just raise your hand in the Zoom chat if you want. And share some best practices, or just unmute yourself and share what you do, what your team does, maybe what you've seen other teams do, or any things that you think are particularly bad with your leveling guide today that you would like to improve.
So I can jump in. I lead a team of 17 across data science, analytics engineering, technical writing, a few other things thrown in there that are, a bit of a little historical anomaly for most data leads. But we actually also just finished a leveling exercise, and I'm so excited. So I've been in my role for 3 years. I've spent 3 years arguing that we needed leveling because we didn't have the concept of senior. So we had this very strong feeling that you don't get a different title unless you have a different role. So a manager is different than a director, but an analyst is not different than a senior analyst. So I fought against that for 3 years and finally got us to a place where we have leveling across the organization. But I do really appreciate how thoughtfully we went about it. And I think this is why our head of people ops was unwilling to bite off this project until he had the resources to really support it well. But what we did was come up with company-wide leveling. So we have 5 company levels and really clear guidelines for what each of those levels should look like. So all of our directors should share these characteristics. All of our managers should share these characteristics. All of our level 2 individual contributors should share these characteristics, kind of whatever those expectations are. And then we slotted roles against those. And so that really covered a lot of the less technical skills. And it covers things like, what does it look like to lead strategy? What does it look like to lead a project? At what level are you expected to, really drive cross-functional conversations and get them to a good outcome? And what does that look like across the org? And I really like that we have those consistent expectations. And then we have a bucket that is, we call craft. And that's where each role gets built out into its own role-specific leveling structure. And so you might have, 3 more characteristics that you break down craft into for a given role, or 5 or 8. It very much depends on the team. And that's where we get into more technical points of view. And I really liked that structure because I think it makes it a lot easier for people to understand what it looks like to perform at a level, even if it doesn't exist on their team. And to understand, especially at key levels, like director tends to be kind of a break point in the way that you expect people to act. It really sets a very clear expectation that everyone at this level should be behaving this way. And this is kind of what we expect from that. And your leadership is beyond just your team and things like that. So I really like the combination of consistency versus role specific expectations.
I love that. One of the things you mentioned gets a little bit to one of the questions I think is interesting, which is like, how much of that was your people partner versus you and your function? Like, what did that partnership look like? And other folks, feel free to share on that after Caitlin as well.
Yeah, so I think that mine is a special case because I have been agitating for this so loudly and for so long. I probably wrote about 70% of the company-wide leveling framework because I just wanted it to get done. And there was theoretically a committee of, 7 or 8 leads of functions. Everyone was bought in, but I sat down and actually took the time to write it out. The other 30% really came from the people function, and everyone else just kind of read it and reacted and wordsmithed, which I think was the right way to get it done in our situation where we were at that time. Presumably someone has to take the lead. It probably shouldn't always be the data lead. And then on the role specific, I think there are folks who went to people ops for more support. I have a really strong point of view. So I worked with the managers on my team to build out the particular role level ladders completely independently, which is great.
Awesome. Other folks want to share? Emily?
Yeah, I won't add a ton more there, but one thing that I've seen go really well in setting expectations and introducing leveling is making sure that that's happening during onboarding for new team members. So I think one of the hardest points in time where we level candidates or where we level people is when we're leveling candidates. We're trying to figure out whether they're senior or staff or whatever level they're at with just 3 to 5 hours of interview, maybe a couple of reference checks, and you trust that their last title gives you some sort of signal. And so introducing as part of the onboarding process, hey, here is our leveling framework. Here is what you need to know about the expectations for performing at that level in this role. We gave you the senior title, or you earned the senior title, presumably. Here's what we mean by senior, just making sure we're on the same page, and then checking off on checking in on that throughout the onboarding process, so that at that 90-day mark, they're performing at whatever level you kind of have in mind.
Yeah, that's a great point about onboarding. Awesome. Anyone else want to share best practices that either you use today or that you'd love to see your team use?
I think Caitlin touched on this a little bit, and I have to say, so I'm a first-time manager, so I don't have experience with this really at all. I'm trying to really absorb some of this knowledge from you all, but something that I've seen that really isn't working well in my current company, and I've seen also in other past companies not work well, is just the inconsistency across departments and the lack of alignment there, where you have like someone who is in a similar data adjacent role on maybe marketing, and they have like senior manager in the title, and you have stronger technical skills and maybe less of the domain knowledge, but you're stuck at senior analyst forever, and you can't like, you have to deal with the misalignment of titles and like the way people perceive your role and your expertise there, and it just creates a lot of unhappiness for a lot of people, especially more in the data domain, I think. And I feel like it affects us more than other teams in a lot of ways, in my experience.
Yeah, great point, Elise.
Yeah.
I saw Andrew. Oh, go ahead.
Oh.
Go, Caitlin, go for it.
Okay. I was going to jump in and say one of the other things that this is the first role that I've seen do this so thoughtfully and publicly is that we divorce title from level and make it really clear that like if you're in a market facing role, you're going to have title inflation. Like we're going to call you a VP. That doesn't mean that you behave as a VP internally. And that's fine. But your level is comparable so that at least you can explain to people like, yes, they're a senior manager, they're a director, they're a VP. We don't expect them to act the way that we would expect you to act as a VP because it is actually a different level. That VP level is level X and this one is level Y. And help people to understand like just the differences, because there is a bit more sort of substance versus style in various roles around what does your title need to mean and what's the impact of that. And that's, I think, really helpful.
Yeah, totally. Andrew, you want to chime in with some of the stuff you mentioned in Thread?
Yeah, I can. I think echoing what Elise said as well, like we have a bit more consistent levels that are also like what Caitlin said, devoid from the title you actually get. But there's no guarantee that like the same level in like finance and data have the same expected competencies for the more like generally like just like transferable skills that you could do in either. In terms of like how much role responsibility, like those aren't consistent across the teams. And I kind of wish we get to that point where the only nuances are specific to your specific role and like the general stuff are kept standard across. The one thing I also notice as a bit of a challenge now is traversing levels, and that like teams handle it very differently, where some teams would require that you exhibit most of the next level skills by the time you're ready to be promoted. Or like some teams only require that you excel in all of your current level skills, and then you start taking on responsibilities when you're promoted. And I know it becomes a touchy topic for some teams because I know some people get trapped in like taking more responsibilities that are outside their level or their title or role even, but then they don't get promoted because they're like falling short on other things, but it's because they accidentally took on more responsibility that like didn't fit. So like it's those sensitivities around traversal that I'm like interested to see how teams have solved it or work around it.
Yeah, it's an interesting, I think this is kind of like is promotion a lagging or a leading indicator question. I think it's super important to align on that at the business. Like when Patreon was much smaller, when we were like 55 people, it was very much a leading indicator because it was like, you're so small, we're so scrappy that it's like, soon as you are showing signs of the next level, like you're going to be promoted. And now that we've gotten bigger and are 500 people, it's way more a lagging indicator. It's like, you need to be performing at the next level for 6 months at least until you're promoted. But making that switch is super hard for employees because you need to communicate like, hey, I know that maybe 2 years ago the promotions would have looked different, but now that we've like formalized these processes, this is actually what's needed for a promotion. So yeah, agree that gets really challenging. One of the things we did in terms of the level inconsistency is we got a lot of, for the most recent leveling updates that Patreon made, we got a lot of leaders in the room and like debated about what those qualities are across levels. So an example here is, when I think about the senior level, to me, that usually means that a person can own what we call loosely defined objectives. So something like, hey, like improve our experimentation processes, right, is like a pretty loosely defined objective. And someone at the senior level should be able to like take that and break it down into pieces and milestone. And so we had conversations like across, engineering and design and product of like, what does senior mean at Patreon? Like, what are the words? What are the actual like adjectives that we use to describe seniors? And now that we have all leveling guides, there's definitely still some inconsistencies, but at least like you can see these words that are like across all of the functional leveling guides, which I feel like is helpful to getting that feeling of like fairness and consistency across them. Cool. Any other thoughts on like best practices before we jump into some more targeted questions?
So I wouldn't.
I was just going to ask more a question than a comment. So I have seen some companies over time as they grow change from we're going to promote people when they deserve to be promoted to we're going to promote people when there's a business need for the promotion. And so it goes from it doesn't matter that you're actually performing at senior. We actually don't have a need for a senior right now, so we're going to avoid giving you the promotion. I'm wondering how other people see this, or if you've had to go to bat against this in your org.
Totally. Anyone want to chime in on that? I have some thoughts, but maybe someone else could go first. I think for us, it's definitely something we have to consider. So we have business need as like as a requirement of a promotion. And I do think it puts a lot of onus on the manager to understand the business, understand the person, and then like write very clearly how those two things meet together, like in our promotion packet, saying like, here's what this person will give to the business at the next level. And sort of like paint that story for the folks that are, at least for us, like in the promotion committee or in the calibration committee. So I do think it's sort of like a management skill that when a business switches to like requiring business need for a promotion, managers have to learn how to be able to communicate like that matchup between it. But I definitely think, especially at larger companies, like sometimes folks don't get promoted because there's no business need. And then that becomes very challenging to communicate that to the person and be like, hey, you are performing, but we just don't necessarily need someone at that next level.
Yeah, I think this is a super interesting challenge. So the way that we explicitly describe it, we have these company-wide levels. We only have 5 company-wide levels. So we actually have more roles within a given team than that. And so part of the way we get around that is that you don't have to have business need to go from an A to a B role. So you can go from 2A to 2B because you deserve it. But to go from 2B to 3A, you have to have a business need. And we also explicitly don't require a business need between 1 and 2. So you can basically get from 1A to 2B just through your own development. And this is where we all feel like there's a ceiling in data, right? Like this is the line for us between senior 2 and staff. And that's where throughout the industry, we can all see like it's really hard to get to that level. There aren't a lot of roles at that level. It's really challenging. And so this is something that I think about all the time because you don't see the same thing on engineering. No one ever says like, oh, we don't need another staff engineer. Of course you need another staff engineer. You always need another staff engineer. 100% of the time. And that's where it feels to me like there's a communication gap and also an experience gap where people haven't always interacted with someone who is an analyst at that level and they don't understand the value that it offers and they don't understand just how much will be lost when that person leaves to go somewhere else because they can't get a promotion. So definitely I'm obsessed with this challenge and it is a lot about how your manager is managing up. But it's also resetting expectations around like, what does the business need?
Yeah, I totally agree. It feels like a lot of the reason that there might be that ceiling is because folks aren't necessarily at companies where there are staff or even senior staff or principal level data scientists that are like building frameworks at the company or teaching the entire company about how to think about data. And so they like don't know what they're going to get when they get someone at that level. Cool. I have a bunch of targeted questions. I'm just going to show them, but then I'll put them one by one and stop sharing and put them in the Slack. One of the things I'm really interested in is this, like, what are the technical expectations that you hold your team to, or that your team is held to, and what are the non-technical? And maybe we could just talk through, what some of those are. I'll pop this in the Slack channel. Would love to know, like, what are the non-technical expectations look like at your company? Specifically, what are they, and how does that change versus the technical expectations? And you can share some thoughts in thread or unmute.
So this is relatively tactical, but something that I really like, that I can't take credit for at all. So our director of analytics, Mel Ristori, wrote a really awesome career ladder for analysts and analytics engineers that uses the same phrases at different levels for those roles. Like there are different expectations of what you need to be proficient in at what level, like where the technical expectations kind of cap out for analysts versus analytics engineers in various parts of the role. And then she sort of broke out separately, like, what do those phrases mean? Like really tactically, what does it mean to be proficient in something? What does it mean to be expert in something? Like, what does that look like? And then another thing that other managers on my team have done is to just like give really explicit examples of projects. Like if we're going to say one of the skills is to lead a complex project end to end, like what's an example of a complex project versus a simple project, or like a long-term project versus a short-term project, or however you're defining kind of what this progression looks like what are some really tactical examples where I can go look at it and say like, oh, I understand how that migration is different than this other kind of project, and the level of complexity of that and what went into it.
I love that. Other thoughts on technical versus non-technical? I'll share at Patreon some of the things we have in our levels related to this. On the technical side, like SQL, Python, and statistics, I think are like three of the big technical knowledge-based skills, or R if folks are using R instead of Python. And then on the non-technical side, one of the things we have in our career ladder is like writing and communication. So how clear and influential and persuasive is your writing, as well as like how well are you at adapting to different stakeholders? Like if you write up an analysis doc and it's for the whole company, is that at a different level of altitude and detail than if you write up an analysis doc for the data science team? And like, what's your ability to sort of traverse audiences in your communication as a data scientist? This is specifically for our data science track. And then the other area we have that's non-technical is like trust building and relationships. So, how does your product manager partner, like how deep and trusting and functional is that relationship? If you're starting out as a data scientist one, like you're probably just learning how to manage stakeholders and like build effective relationships. Whereas if you're a staff data scientist, you should be building extremely effective relationships across levels of the organization. So those are the two examples from what we use in our guide. Any other thoughts on this one?
Broadly, I was trying to look for R specific and I couldn't find it off the top of my head, which is a bit of a problem because I haven't looked at it recently. But I think that like common themes that we share across what Caitlin and Maura shared was I noticed with the less technical skills, it's more on like increasing scope of influence or like broadening the number of stakeholders, or similar to what Maura said, like number of stakeholders you interface with. And then with the technical stuff, it goes first from broad statements on things you could do with SQL. So like at DBT, we're a bit more honed in on SQL. There's a bit of like Python skill that like comes stacked into it, but it's a bit more focused on SQL. So for the earlier stages, there are like specific skills in SQL that we kind of lay out, like your ability to grapple with certain SQL concepts. But after that, it becomes more the like broadening of like loosening the definition of success and you being able to like fill that in for yourself. So I think I heard something similar where you start to have more loosely defined problems and trust that your more senior people can get to that. But in the first few stages, it's less about loosening definitions and more about like covering ground that we know our team needs to address. And then once you hit that point where you're like at the baseline of what the team does throughout the entire infrastructure that's in existence, then the like higher levels go more on like broadening the capabilities of the team versus just being able to fill in the gaps that currently exist.
Will you share, Andrew, how specific that is? Like when you said that,
I can look for it.
Made me think that it's like uses Windows functions properly, or like knows how to aggregate? Like, is it that specific, or is it more broad concepts?
It was a bit less. It's like the first stage was being able to write effective SQL, or like being able to like deliver models that have value. And then the second was more being able to consider performance implications and scale
Got it.
as like the trade-off. So it was a bit less on like knowing specific functions, but more like window functions usually come in as a product of like optimization and efficiency versus like Cartesian joins that you create as a product. So it's like these were like things that are more goal oriented, but you can kind of associate specific SQL functions or Python competencies associated with those requirements.
Yeah, well, that's a great example of one of the things that I see in our leveling guide is like, as you get more senior, your understanding of performance and cost and also scalability become much deeper, right? Like if you're a senior staff data scientist or data analyst, you should be thinking about, is this thing going to last for the next year? Or is it like a quick hacky fix that works today? You should be like weighing those trade-offs. So yeah, it's a good example of sort of like a higher level concept and what that looks like in practice. Thanks for sharing.
There's also the amount of hand holding. Sorry, last thing I was going to tack on. Like on the technical sides, it's also like lower levels allow more flexibility where the completion of a complex task might require like jamming with a teammate. And then the higher levels would be like being able to independently solve the problem and only come in during peer review, or like only request help at peer review stage. These were sort of things which we're not super firm on, but just like a benchmark for you to gauge how advanced you are in the technical skill.
Yeah, that's great. Anything else on technical versus non-technical? And anyone else who hasn't spoken, you can feel free to chime in the thread or unmute. Okay, I'm going to move us on to our next topic then. I'd love to talk about craft and quality. So I think Caitlin mentioned you have some element of craft in your leveling guide. We recently introduced like data science definitions of craft. Like, what does it mean to have craft as a data scientist or a data engineer? What does it look like to build with quality? And that changes at each level. And these are things both like reproducibility, documentation. Is your work like well organized? Is it atomic? So if someone like goes and reads your work, can they like see all the units in one place? I'd love to hear if folks have any thoughts on how craft or quality like play into your leveling expectations. Are they part of them? Are they not? Or maybe any like broader sort of values related to craft and quality at your organization and how you think about it.
So for us, we frame the company like large chunks of characteristics as with craft as the first one, and that's where we really kind of build out what each role specific ladder looks like. And so then within those, we kind of build the definition of craft for each. And so we use that pretty broadly. It includes a lot of kind of technical skills generally. But for us, a lot of it is around some of the sort of performance and just understanding this secondary characteristics of what you're writing, whether that's performance or cost, or it's getting beyond, does it do the job, to does it do the job well? And do I understand the long-term impacts of what I'm doing? And it also, for us, often is captured in kind of mentorship and understanding how to help other people up level, because I think in a lot of cases, that's where it's most visible. Not just can you do good work, but can you see what's in someone's PR that is suboptimal and coach them through how to resolve the issue. So it's kind of, those are the most visible places for us where I think we see that.
Yeah, I love that. Caitlin, how do you think about getting people to care about or know about the second order effects? Like, how do you approach that from a coaching standpoint, maybe?
Gosh, there is nothing like doing it wrong to make you learn. Like, I don't know. I think this is the thing that I struggle with most as a manager is I learned a lot of things the hard way because I didn't have a team. I tended to work on really small teams, and like I would just struggle through and do something horribly wrong and like lock the database for a couple hours and like, oh God, what have I done? Whoops. And yet I feel like as your team grows, you should be able to prevent that. You should be able to coach people through it. But like, I've never found anything as helpful as just doing it wrong. Bringing down production is the best teacher. Surely that can't scale forever. But it's a brutal and true teacher. I would love it if somebody else has a better answer to that question.
One of the things we've sometimes done at Patreon is like, especially with bigger analyses or frameworks or data models, we'll have a sort of a checklist item that's like, what will this look like if we build it like this? What will happen in a year or 2 years? And just have sort of that prompting moment for the data scientist to like be like, I wonder if I do, like, if this job runs for the next year, like what's going to happen? So I feel like sometimes if there is like an analysis checklist, sometimes having that prompt can help people be like, wait a second, what will this actually look like in a year or 2 years from now? Any other thoughts on craft or quality?
That reminded me of a podcast episode I listened to recently that had like the make it work, make it right, make it fast sort of approach to things, which I'm trying to like think of ways to incorporate now. And like if you do it wrong, you're going to create more cruft and tech debt that you'll need to deal with in the future. But in theory, it's a nice way of like delivering value faster. One thing I tried doing was I like writing like love letters to myself, but broader, like the open business. So one of the earliest projects I got when I moved into the internal data team was like a new way of structuring one of the things we were tracking at DBT. And it was a PR that someone had initially started, but it took me 3 months to get from the PR stage where there were a bunch of issues already identified to actually being fully shipped. And 3 months is a long amount of time, but everyone understood that there was a reason for the complexity, but I still like finished that project off writing like a whole Notion page on why it took me 3 months to ship this, and like had pitfalls and like things I learned from, more as like an open letter for the rest of the team to go back into in the future. But we don't review it as often. And I think a bit of like the retro practicing, maybe not as religious as like sprint teams would do it in a very consistent 2-week cycle, but maybe alongside quarter planning, having like clear retros to spread the like, if you broke prod, maybe we don't break prod 4 more times, but we accelerate that.
I love that idea.
I think my VPN kicked me out.
If you can still hear us, was it a love letter to your former self or to your future self?
A bit of both, a bit of regrets of like, man, I can't believe this took you this long to figure out. And also like, this is why it took you so long to figure out, and hopefully you don't do it again. So it was a bit of both. It was like being honest and regretful about the things I did inefficiently, and then flagging why those inefficiencies came to be, and like trying to be honest, and that like some of it was not caused by my work, some of it was caused by like a structural way to break apart the big problem, which was more like a learning moment. I don't know if that makes sense.
Yeah, totally. Wow, I really like that practice. Did you share the letter internally? Was it like, hey?
I did. Yeah, so we had shipped the PR. We had like a subsequent like dashboard that built on top of that work. So there was like something for outward facing in the company. And then we also attached like at the end, if you want to know why this took so long, here was like the open note I had on all of the learnings throughout that process. So I'm like trying to get more into a groove, but that writing process takes a lot of time. And so when your team's bogged down, it's like, is this really valuable? Do I just jam with another engineer and tell him what broke and how not to fix it? But I think that writing practice becomes like good, because in a more async or more like even as the team scales, we're like growing from 4 to 8-ish. Like you can't have the one-on-one conversations with everyone at the 4-person team with like the 8 or even 20-person team down the road.
Yeah, it also gets into sort of codifying institutional knowledge, right? And if you like wanted to look back in a year about what you learned from that process, it becomes way more helpful if it's written down than said aloud.
And if you have folks leaving the business also, it's like good to still be able to keep that historical context.
Yeah, totally.
It's just hard to carve the time.
I'd love to chat a little bit about, we touched on it a little bit, but sort of senior staff, principal, maybe even like earlier levels. What are the traits and qualities that you see that distinguish those? Like, what do those look like for your company? One of the things I always think about senior candidates is that they should be able to say, like, let me tell you how to blank. So if I ask a senior candidate, like, how do you think about cohort analysis related to product retention? They'll be like, Mara, let me tell you how I think about cohort analysis. Like, here's how you got to do it. Here's how you got to split it. Here are the pitfalls of it. Here's where it goes wrong. They'll have like a strong opinion about how to approach a problem. Now that's obviously a very like loose concept that's hard to write down, but that is like a trait and a quality that I see when I see that a candidate has a level of experience to be a senior or staff level candidate. I'd love for folks to share other examples of like traits, qualities you see, maybe any that feel fuzzy to you or where you feel like that leveling, distinguishing is hard. Yeah, would love to share some examples.
So interestingly enough, I had a conversation with someone this morning who had spent the early part of her career working in people analytics. And so she's very good at people analytics, but in her current role, she does sales and product analytics. So she had been senior, she'd worked with high level projects, really impactful, but this is her first time working in product analytics. And it really, she's senior analyst, or is senior describing her role within product analytics? I don't know the right answer. I don't know. Did my internet cut out?
Yeah, but I think we got it. It's like, is she senior as a product analyst or is she senior in other areas and junior as a product analyst? Yeah.
Yeah, and I don't know how you reconcile those two, but that's something that I've been thinking about actually top of mind today.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I've definitely seen similar challenges when someone is a senior IC and transitions into management. And you're like, well, you have a lot of like senior qualities. You've managed big products, you've had big impact, but you're like totally new as a manager and there's a whole level of skill sets to get up on. So like, how do you both have the conversation with that person about their performance and how to think about it and how to get up gaps in certain areas? But then also there's a question of like what actually is the right level for them and where should they be and how does the business like compensate them accordingly if they have that sort of different role or knowledge depth. Yeah, it's an interesting question.
Yeah, I mean, I think from my point of view, there are technical differences between super senior roles, but most people, I think, are more defined by non-technical skills at higher levels. Like, it's really about the ability to rally a team around something, the ability to, the semi-technical skill, the ability to see around corners and like see what's going to go wrong before it goes wrong. I think there's a number of areas like that where it's not about the technical skills. Like, almost by necessity, you're going to pick up the technical skills that you need, and they're always only a Google away. Whereas being able to really see a thorny, ill-defined project from idea to completion is really, really hard. And whether that's like introducing experimentation within an org or like shifting a process from something, like you need a level of seniority and a level of interaction with stakeholders that's very different. So I would argue that it's much more about those skills, and those transfer well between disciplines. So the people analyst might have some learning to do, but is more likely to still kind of act in the senior way in the product analytics role than to feel like they've like gone back to zero.
Yeah.
People management, though, that's a different hard thing. I don't know about people management.
Yeah, I think
go ahead.
That's why I like the way that Andrew framed it earlier around like increasing scope instead of maybe like having done the analysis before or having reference points into the best way to approach a problem. Like, that comes with experience, and I don't necessarily think that's the same as level. I think the scope one is probably a little bit of a better measure, but I will echo Caitlin, the management piece is a whole different ballgame that should be its own conversation.
Yeah. One other framework to share that I like here is we sometimes use the KSQ framework at Patreon. I don't know if folks are familiar, which is knowledge, skills, and qualities. And knowledge would be things like knowledge of people analytics versus product analytics, whereas skills would be like writing SQL queries or writing Python scripts or whatever. And then qualities would be things like your growth mindset or your grit or your communication style. And so sometimes in cases like that, I've said to folks like, hey, you have the skills and you have the qualities. It's just really like a knowledge gap. And what are the things we can do to close that knowledge gap as fast as possible, whether it's, mentorship or advisorship or reading a book or like whatever it may be. It can sometimes feel more like tactical for them to grasp than like fuzzy. Anything else on the senior staff, principal, any other things that like distinguish between levels that folks have seen? Also, if you haven't spoken yet, I invite you to contribute if you'd like to. Okay, hearing none, I'm going to move us along. Okay, final topic. We'll see how far we go in the last 10 minutes. I'm curious to talk about stakeholders and leveling and expectations. Basically, like, how do you communicate what you should expect of a data scientist, a data analyst, analytics engineer, whatever's within your org, to your cross-functional stakeholders, to product teams or to engineering managers, to business partners? What have you done when that has been misaligned between what a stakeholder thinks your data scientist or data analyst should be doing and what your data analyst or data scientist is actually held to by you? Would love to hear some like thoughts or horror stories or recipes for success from folks.
So I come from very small orgs, and a lot of this is really kind of handled one-on-one. And I think we generally have roughly functional alignment with our analysts. So the analyst is working with one team at a time. And I think it's a lot easier to kind of create the right expectations and help people understand like individuals as individuals. And, the difference between a very junior analyst and a staff analyst is very obvious, but it's not like, oh, you should expect this of this level. It's like, this person can do this and this person will not do that, but like have the conversation with them and they'll find the support they need within the team to get the thing done. So for all, as much as possible, I try to like not communicate limitations and instead communicate like, here's how it goes. Like this person will be your primary contact. They might not be doing all the work. They might need help. You and I might have another conversation about what this project is really going to look like or will really take, to the extent that it's vastly outside of the expectations that I have for this role or this person. But it's much more ad hoc. So I'm very interested in how other folks have handled that in larger orgs with sort of more consistency needed.
One thing we've done, and I don't know that this is perfect, but we literally have a like doc that's the guide to data science and product, like how we work together, who owns what, who's responsible for which parts of the product process. And I do think each team is unique in its own way. So it's definitely not like it has not solved all of our problems, but at least when things go wrong, we can sort of both open that doc together as like leadership and say like, hey, are we close to this recipe or is there an area where we're way off? Like, I think one area this comes up a lot for data teams is like project management, like the organization and scoping of that work. Should that be on the data person that's on the team, or should that be on the like product manager or the operations manager, whoever it is? And I find sometimes that when you don't have that stakeholder doing that work, data teams can sometimes tend to do it themselves because they're like, I need to know what to do and we need to have things organized. So I think that doc is at least, it sort of is it's our philosophy that we've put forward, and it at least gives us something to look at together and agree or disagree on. And then when I found those points of disagreement, get deeper and be like, well, who should really be doing that? And like, should I really expect my senior data scientist to do that? Or is that sort of outside of their scope? And if I am expecting them to do that, are they going to be excited about that expectation? So that's been one thing that we've tried to do that I think can at least help the conversation. Other thoughts on stakeholder expectations?
I guess similar to Caitlin, like being in a smaller data team, it's like a bit more agile and different, and like you kind of treat all the analysts with slightly different styles of working, and like to what extent. Also, because like the demands of like marketing and product in our team, which is one common split, also varies between like how much data competencies exist within the teams themselves, who can kind of self-service, and so that kind of changes the strategy a bit of the relationship. But one thing I found, what Erica's done great, my manager, was like, I think aligning on the 30-60-90 priorities sets the tone for the working relationship. And because it's kind of hard to etch things in stone today, just because too many things are like upside down every now and then. At least the 30-60-90 sets sort of the working pace and cadence for that person, the analyst's relationship with the stakeholder, and then hopefully kind of puts things into, I guess, like into context. So for example, the marketing team, my counterpart Brandon does a lot more like project building, and a lot more of the project management within his own like different data projects. Whereas mine, I usually get tacked on to different product teams who are about to launch features, and I'm pulled in at a specific time of that development process to help advise on like tracking and telemetry and things that go beyond. So it's like a very different dynamic, but we're also at the same level. So it's weird because the relationships with our stakeholders are kind of different. But I think our 30-60-90 ushered us into that type of relationship because it was so deeply involved in the context of the team.
Is that a 30-60-90 when someone joins, or is that like every quarter they're 30-60-90?
That's when someone joins, and then we do quarterly planning sort of in line with the business units.
Yep.
So we hear like what they're planning and then kind of build our own roadmap internally in the data team. And then Erica and our manager and our counterpart manager in the stakeholder team signs off on like what our quarter plan is supposed to look like. Yep. And then you kind of flip the plan over its head because quarters never go the way you wish they do. But it's like, it's a bit of like a North Star to try to aim towards and guide principles around.
Yep. Awesome. We have 4 minutes left. Maybe we'll get to one last question, which is, how do you structure leveling conversations with your team? I think this gets a little bit to what we were talking about with onboarding and getting people up to their levels when they start. One of the things I'd like to do, which takes a lot of time, but I actually found is super helpful from a management perspective, is putting out all the expectations of someone level, putting out all the expectations of someone at the next level, and then basically highlighting every sentence of those green, yellow, red, like where are they crushing it? Where are they middling? Where are they missing the mark with examples? So like if the next level is, executes loosely defined objectives end to end with cross-functional stakeholders, I'll put an example of a project where like they needed a lot of guidance executing, or they didn't scope it super well, and we've already shared that feedback and gone through that. But I think looking at sort of the whole map next to each other can be very helpful for driving clarity between a manager and a direct report. And then also motivating, like if you see the next level and see a specific expectation that you are not yet meeting, then you can come up with ideas and opportunities of like, well, how could I meet that? If I'm supposed to be doing more mentorship to get to the staff level, who could I mentor that's coming on board? Or if I should be sharing better best practices with the team, like what's a lunch and learn that I could give in the next quarter? So yeah, that's something I've liked to do with my leveling conversations. I'd love to hear if any folks have additional ideas or sort of how you structure leveling and expectation conversations.
Yeah, so I do something very similar. I'll drop an old ladder and the way that I structure this into the chat. But I actually take the full career ladder and kind of give them you're not even at the level you're at yet. You're somewhere in between, or you're like exceeding the next level for each, roughly row skill on the ladder. And I like to do it independently. So like I will do this and I will ask them to do it, and then we'll have a conversation to compare, because I think those gaps are the most informative part of the conversation. Like, it's great that we both know that you're, highly proficient at Python. Cool. It's really interesting that you think you're very good at managing ambiguous projects, and I am not quite sure. And so those tend to be the richest conversations, I think. But I also echo, like, trying to put something on every line. Like, if you're not meeting expectations yet, like, what are the projects where you have a chance to show this? Because if I'm saying that you don't meet expectations, but I'm also not giving you any projects where you'll be able to demonstrate that you meet expectations, then that's obviously not setting you up for success. And that's my failing as a manager, not your failing as an IC.
I love that. Like, have them do it and you do it and compare the two. I think that's such a useful, can sometimes be very painful, but like, it's a very useful management exercise. Similarly, we do, as part of our formal performance reviews, we do like you give yourself rating and your manager gives you a rating. But even informally, it's nice to be like, on a scale of 1 to 10, how do you think things are going with your performance? And like, have them give a number and you give a number, and like talk about that potential delta. So yeah, I love that idea. I think we are almost at time. Does anyone, Andrew, want to have the last word, or anyone else want to chime in on leveling expectations?
No, this is great. Thank you so much, Maura. This has been a really great conversation. It's always awesome to bounce ideas off of everybody. So the recording will be up before too long. I can't make too many promises on speed, but I'll post it in the channel when we're done. But thank you so much. And thank you for everybody who joined.
Thanks all. Have a great rest of your day.
Thanks,
All right.
everybody.
Bye.